219. That's what I said to a 6-year-old boy sitting on the floor of the Jellyfish Gallery at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I was wrong, by the way. It was 221. He corrected me without looking up. I didn't know his father controlled 4 districts of Chicago. I didn't know there were 6 armed men searching every corridor of the Shed Aquarium for him at that exact moment. I didn't know that his father's hands, large, capable hands that had signed death warrants and held his dying wife, hadn't stopped shaking in 1,427 days. All I knew was that a child was counting alone in the dark, and nobody was counting with him. So I sat down, and I counted wrong. That was my first mistake. My name is Sophie Williams. I'm 29 years old, and I clean floors for a living. 2 jobs. The first one starts at 6 in the morning at a laundromat on Halsted Street in Bridgeport, where I fold other people's sheets and scrub detergent residue out of industrial drums, while my daughter Lily sleeps at my mother's apartment 3 blocks away. The second one starts at 9 in the evening at the Shed Aquarium on South DuSable Lakeshore Drive, where I mop galleries and polish glass and empty trash cans that tourists fill with half-eaten hot dogs and crumpled maps. Between those 2 jobs, I am a mother. Lily is 4. She has dark curls that refuse to stay in any ponytail I've ever attempted, a laugh that sounds like water over rocks, and an obsession with the color purple so consuming that every item in her small world must conform to its spectrum. Purple toothbrush, purple sneakers, purple cereal bowl. If I move a single purple bead on her nightstand, she knows. She always knows. Her father left before she was born. Not dramatically. Not with a fight or a slammed door. He simply stopped answering his phone one Tuesday and never started again. I found out 3 weeks later that he'd moved to Phoenix with a dental hygienist named Brooke. He has never met his daughter. His loss is so complete that I've stopped measuring it. I tell you this so you understand what I am. What I was, the night I sat down on the aquarium floor next to a boy I'd never met and started counting wrong. I was nobody, a woman with bleach stains on her fingers and $217 in her checking account, 14 hours into a 16-hour workday, with aching knees and a mop handle that had been rewrapped with duct tape so many times it looked like a cast. And the boy on the floor was the son of Alexander Volkov. I need to tell you about the jellyfish. The Shed keeps their moon jellyfish in a cylindrical tank in Gallery 4, a column of blue light that pulses gently in the dark like a heartbeat made visible. When the aquarium closes at 9 and the crowds drain away, the Jellyfish Gallery becomes the quietest place in Chicago. No engine noise from Lakeshore Drive, no CTA rumble, just the low hum of filtration systems and the soft, rhythmic contractions of creatures that have no brains, no blood, no bones, just movement, just pulse. I loved cleaning that gallery. Not because it was easy. The curved glass attracted fingerprints the way Lily attracted purple objects, with magnetic inevitability. But because in those hours between 10 and midnight, with nothing but the blue glow and the silent pulse, I could pretend the world outside didn't exist. No overdue electricity bill. No landlord's voicemail I hadn't returned. No parent-teacher conference at Lily's preschool where they'd suggest, gently, that perhaps Lily needed additional evaluation. I was in Gallery 4 at 11:43 on the night everything changed, running my squeegee down the curved glass, when I heard counting. Not loud, not a whisper either. Precise, metronomic. The kind of counting that has nothing to do with math and everything to do with holding the world together. 214, 215, 216. I lowered my squeegee. A boy sat on the polished concrete floor, legs crossed, back perfectly straight, forehead nearly touching the glass. He was small, maybe 6, maybe a young 7, and he was dressed in a way that made no sense in this context. Charcoal gray trousers with a knife-edge crease, a navy vest over a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows with surgical precision, each fold exactly the width of 2 fingers. Polished Oxford shoes that probably cost more than my rent. He was counting the jellyfish pulses, each contraction of each translucent bell, tracked and cataloged by a child sitting alone on the floor of a closed aquarium at nearly midnight. I should have radioed security. That was the protocol. Unauthorized person after hours, call it in, don't engage, wait for the team. I'd sign papers, I'd watch the training video. I knew the rules, but he was 6, and he was counting alone. I set my squeegee in the bucket. I walked to a spot about 2 feet to his left, close enough to be present, far enough to not intrude, and I sat down on the cold concrete floor. My knees popped loud enough to echo. He didn't look at me, didn't flinch, didn't stop counting. 217, 218. I watched the jellyfish for a moment, trying to find his rhythm. Then I said, softly, 219. He stopped. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. I know because I counted those too. You're wrong, he said. His voice was clear and unhurried, free of the uncertainty that usually colors children's speech. It's 221. You missed the double pulse at 219. The larger specimen contracts twice in rapid succession every 47 cycles. You weren't watching the right one. I looked at the tank. Dozens of moon jellyfish drifted in the blue column, their bells opening and closing at slightly different tempos. Show me which one, I said. For the first time, he moved, not toward me, toward the glass. He pressed his index finger against the surface, pointing at a jellyfish slightly larger than the others, positioned near the top of the column. That one. Specimen A, I named her. Her cycle is 3.2 seconds. The others average 3.7. She's the fastest. Specimen A? I named them all. A through Q. Q is the smallest. She's behind the filtration intake. You can only see her when A moves left. I sat with that for a moment. This child had not only memorized the individual pulse rates of 17 jellyfish, he'd named them, mapped their positions, and tracked their behavioral patterns. At 6 years old, on the floor of a closed aquarium. Alone. I'm Sophie, I said. He didn't respond to my name. Instead, he placed his palm flat against the glass, fingers spread, as if trying to feel the pulse through the surface. My name is Mikail, he said. 222. So we counted together. I counted wrong several more times. He corrected me each time with the patient precision of someone who has accepted that other people are simply less accurate. There was no condescension in it, no frustration, just fact. We'd been counting for 17 minutes when I heard the radios. The aquarium at night has its own language of sounds, the hum of climate control, the gurgle of filtration, the distant clank of pipes expanding and contracting. But radio static cuts through all of it. Sharp, urgent, wrong. I heard it before I saw them. 2 security guards, then 3, then a man I didn't recognize. Not aquarium staff, not in uniform, speaking into a phone with the clipped cadence of someone reporting to a superior. Gallery 4. He's in Gallery 4. Yes, sir. Unharmed. There's someone with him. That someone was me. Sitting on the floor in my aquarium-issued coveralls with the bleach stain on the left knee, next to a child who hadn't stopped counting. Mikail. The voice came from the gallery entrance. Deep, controlled, accented in a way that turned the 3 syllables into something between a command and a prayer. I looked up. He stood in the doorway, like a wall. That was my first impression, not of a man, but of a barrier, something constructed to keep the world on one side and everything he valued on the other. Tall, broad in the shoulders but not heavy. A face that belonged on currency, all planes and angles, sharp enough to cut, dark hair silvered at the temples, a scar along his jaw, thin and pale, the kind made by something precise and deliberate. He was wearing a black suit, even at midnight, even in an aquarium, even with his child missing. A black suit, perfectly fitted, as if chaos was something that happened to other people's clothes. But his hands were in his pockets, and even through the fabric I could see them moving. Not fidgeting, not gesturing, trembling, a constant, involuntary vibration that he was trying to hide in the depths of Italian wool. He wasn't angry. I understood that immediately, even before I understood anything else about him. The look on his face wasn't fury. It was the specific, annihilating terror of a man who has already lost someone he loved and has just spent, I would learn later, 41 minutes believing he might have lost another. "Mikail," he said again, quieter this time. "Dad." Mikail didn't turn around. "She counts wrong, but she tries. We're at 287. Specimen A did 3 double pulses. That's above her average." Alexander Volkov's gaze moved from his son to me. I have never, before or since, been looked at like that. It wasn't assessment, though he was assessing me. It wasn't suspicion, though suspicion lived somewhere in it. It was the look of a man seeing something impossible. His son voluntarily sitting next to a stranger, speaking in complete sentences about jellyfish, relaxed in a way that Alexander clearly had not seen in a long time. I started to stand, to explain, to apologize. "Don't," Mikail said, still watching the tank. "We haven't finished the count." I looked at Alexander Volkov. He looked at me. The moment stretched and held, suspended like the jellyfish in their blue column, weightless, translucent, full of something alive that neither of us could name. Then Alexander Volkov did something that, I would later learn, he almost never did. He stepped back. He leaned against the doorframe of Gallery 4, and he watched his son count jellyfish with a janitor, and he did not interfere. We reached 300. Mikail declared the session complete, a statistically significant sample size, and stood with the careful precision of someone who plans every movement before executing it. He looked at his father, his gaze landing somewhere near Alexander's left ear. "Sophie counts wrong," he said. But she sat down. Nobody sits down. Alexander's jaw tightened. Not in anger, in something worse. Recognition. "It's late, Mikail. Time to go." The boy nodded. He turned to me, his eyes tracking to a point just above my shoulder. "Thank you for the inaccurate counting, Sophie. Your technique needs work, but your presence was acceptable." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Thank you, Mikail. I'll practice." He considered this seriously. "That would be advisable." Alexander placed a hand on his son's back to guide him toward the exit. I noticed that his hand, still trembling, hovered a centimeter above Mikail's vest rather than making contact. The boy didn't seem to notice, but I did. At the gallery entrance, Alexander paused. He turned his head just enough to look back at me. One of his men stepped forward, a mountain in a charcoal suit. "Your name," the mountain said. "Not a request." "Sophie Williams." The mountain typed something into a phone. Alexander said nothing more. He guided Mikail into the corridor, and their footsteps, one set measured and heavy, one set light and metronomic, faded into the hum of the aquarium. I sat on the floor for another 10 minutes. My hands were shaking. Mine, though, eventually stopped. 3 days later, a black SUV parked outside the laundromat on Halsted Street. I was behind the counter at 10:15 in the morning, sorting quarters from the change machine and half listening to the TV bolted to the wall. A morning show where 2 people were arguing about whether oat milk counted as milk. The laundromat was nearly empty. One regular, Mrs. Dolores Guzman, ran her weekly load of bedsheets. A college kid slept in a plastic chair with his headphones in. The SUV door opened, and a boy in a navy peacoat walked in. Mikail Volkov crossed the threshold of the Bridgeport Coin Laundry like he was entering a laboratory, observing, cataloging, immediately disapproving of the organization system. "Your machines aren't numbered," he announced. I stared at him from behind the counter. Behind him, Anton, the mountain from the aquarium, stood in the doorway, his expression caught between professional stoicism and the particular exhaustion of a man who has failed to prevent a 6-year-old from executing a plan. "Mikail," I said, "what are you doing here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the folding table, the long formica surface where customers sorted their clean laundry, and placed a shoebox-sized object on it. He opened the box with the care of a surgeon, revealing an organ for transplant. Inside was a model ship, a sailing vessel, maybe 14 inches long. The hull was beautiful, dark wood, precisely shaped, sanded smooth. But everything above the waterline was unfinished. Bare masts, no sails, no rigging, no paint. The bowsprit jutted forward like a finger pointing at something that no longer existed. Around the base of the hull, I could see where glue had been applied and reapplied. Tiny dots of adhesive, dried and cracked, where someone had tried to attach the delicate upper pieces and failed. Some of the thinner mast components were snapped, not from carelessness, but from hands that couldn't hold them steady enough. Mikail arranged the box precisely in the center of the table. Then he reached into his coat pocket and produced a roll of bills held together with a rubber band. "My dad started this with me 1,427 days ago," he said. "His hands shake now. He can't hold the pieces. I took $400 from his desk. I want to hire you to help him finish it." The laundromat hummed around us. A dryer tumbled someone's jeans with a rhythmic thud. Mrs. Guzman looked up from her phone, glanced at the boy in the expensive coat, and looked back down. "Does your dad know you're here?" I asked. "No." Mikail paused. "Anton promised not to tell. But Anton always tells." I looked at Anton. Anton was texting. "Mikail." I came around the counter and crouched in front of him, bringing myself to his eye level, though I'd already learned not to seek direct eye contact. "I can't take your dad's money." "Why not?" "Because he didn't offer it." Mikail considered this with visible concentration. "But he would. He pays people to be near me. Dr. Rhodes, Dr. Chen, Miss Kirkpatrick. They all get paid. You're better than all of them. You sat down." The simplicity of it cracked something open in my chest. You sat down, as if that single act, lowering myself to a cold floor and counting wrong, was the most remarkable thing any adult had ever done for him. "How many times has your dad tried to finish this ship?" I asked, looking at the model. 47 times. I count. 47 attempts. 47 failures. And the boy had counted every single one. I was still crouching by the folding table when the door opened again. No bell. The bell had been broken for months. Just the sound of expensive shoes on linoleum and the sudden atmospheric compression that happens when Alexander Volkov enters a room. He stood in the Bridgeport Coin Laundry in a suit that cost more than every machine in the building combined. His eyes found Mikail first. Always Mikail first. Then the model ship on the table. Then the roll of bills. Then me. Mikail. His voice was level. His hands were in his pockets. "We need to go." "Not yet." Mikail placed one hand on the ship's hull with a gentleness that made my throat tight. "Sophie says the hull needs sanding before we can paint. She knows because her daughter broke a wooden boat at the park, and they fixed it together. I hadn't actually said that yet, but I had been thinking it, examining the rough spots where the glue had dried unevenly. Alexander's gaze shifted to me. In the fluorescent light of the laundromat, so different from the blue glow of the jellyfish gallery, I could see the full extent of what he carried. Lines at the corners of his eyes that weren't from age, a tension in his jaw that never fully released, and his hands, hidden in his pockets, shaking against the fabric in a rhythm he couldn't control. "Miss Williams! Mr. Volkov! My son appears to have robbed me." "Technically," I heard myself say, "it's an advance on services rendered." Something happened to his face. Not a smile. Alexander Volkov didn't smile, I would learn, the way other people smiled. But the stone shifted. A crack appeared, and through it, something almost warm. $400, he said. "For what service, exactly?" "Finishing the ship," Mikail answered before I could. "Sophie will help. She sat down at the aquarium. She counts wrong, but she corrects. That's what scientists do. They make errors and revise." A dryer buzzed. Someone's load was done. The TV couple had moved on to arguing about almonds. Alexander Volkov looked at the model ship his son was protecting with both hands. He looked at the roll of bills on the Formica table. He looked at me, a woman in a bleach-spotted apron, standing in a laundromat that smelled of fabric softener and rust. "You have a daughter," he said. Not a question. He'd done his research. Of course he had. Lily, she's 4. Mikail mentioned her. Another pause. He rarely mentions anyone. I waited. I had learned in those 17 minutes on the aquarium floor that silence with this family was not empty. It was full. It was working. I would like to offer you a position, Alexander said finally. Companion to Mikail. 3 days per week. 4 to 8 in the evening. Your daughter is welcome. I have 2 jobs already. You would have 1. He named a figure. The figure was obscene. The figure was life-changing. The figure was the kind of number that separates before from after in a person's financial existence. I looked at Mikail, who was carefully realigning the model ship's box on the folding table so its edges were parallel with the table's edge. Can I bring sandpaper? I asked. 220 grit for the hull, Mikail said immediately. 400 grit for the masts. I researched it. Alexander Volkov's hands trembled in his pockets. But his eyes, dark, unreadable, dangerous in all the ways that should have made me run, held something I recognized. Hope. The kind of hope that a man buries so deep he forgets it's there. Until a 6-year-old boy steals $400 and carries a broken ship across the city to a laundromat. And suddenly, the ground above it shifts. Wednesday, I said. I'll start Wednesday. Let me tell you about parallel play. When Lily was 2, she went through a phase where she wouldn't let anyone sit across from her. Not next to her, across. Eye-to-eye positioning triggered something in her that she couldn't articulate, and I couldn't solve. Every pediatrician and every parenting book said the same thing. Face-to-face interaction is essential for development. Force it. Practice it. She'll adapt. She didn't adapt. She screamed. She threw her purple bowl. She hid under the table. My mother, who raised 3 children and has the specific, battle-tested wisdom of a woman who did it alone, said one thing. Stop sitting across from her. Sit beside her. So I did. I stopped trying to face Lily during meals, during play, during reading time. Instead, I sat next to her, shoulder to almost shoulder, doing my own thing, eating, drawing, reading, while she did hers. No pressure to engage, no expectation of eye contact, just presence, side by side. Within a week, she started talking to me again. Not because I asked her to, because she chose to. The absence of demand created space for connection. Parallel play. I didn't know it had a name until much later. I just knew it worked. I used it with Mikail from the first Wednesday. The Volkov house was not a home. It was a statement. Stone and glass on a cliff overlooking Lake Michigan. It sat behind iron gates and a 1/4 mile of old-growth oaks like a beautiful, impenetrable argument. The kind of place where the word security was both architectural and literal. Armed men at the perimeter, cameras tracking movement with algorithmic patience, and an interior so meticulously curated it felt less like a dwelling and more like a museum of wealth where no one had thought to include an admission ticket for joy. Mikail's room was the exception. It was painted blue, not the aggressive blue of corporate branding, but the specific blue of the jellyfish gallery at the shed. Calm. Deep. Alive. His bookshelves held 342 books. He counted weekly, he told me, in case one went missing, ranging from illustrated encyclopedias to graduate-level texts on marine biology. A model of the solar system hung from the ceiling with each planet at its correct relative distance. A small desk sat against the window, its surface organized with a precision that would have made a surgeon weep. And on that desk, in the center, sat the unfinished ship. I didn't touch it. Not the first day, not the second, not the third. I sat on the floor near Mikail's bookshelf and sketched in a notebook while he worked on categorizing botanical specimens he'd collected from the garden. Lily sat between us, arranging her wooden blocks by shade of purple, a task Mikail found both confusing and fascinating. Lilac is not the same as lavender, he told her during our second session. They're both purple, Lily replied. They're both in the purple family. But lilac has more red, lavender has more blue. The wavelengths are different. Lily picked up both blocks and held them next to each other. This one is more purple, she decided, holding up the lilac. That's subjective. It's more purple. Mikail looked at the blocks for a long moment. Then he arranged them in his specimen tray, between a pressed fern and a labeled oak leaf. I'll file it under P, he said. For purple, disputed. I drew jellyfish while they debated color theory. Wrong jellyfish, as it turned out. My anatomical accuracy was, according to Mikail, concerning. Moon jellyfish have 4 horseshoe-shaped gonads visible through the bell, he informed me, peering at my sketch from 3 feet away. Yours has 6. That's not a jellyfish. That's an error. Can you show me? He hesitated. Then he walked over, not to me, but to my notebook. He stood beside it, studying my drawing with his head tilted. May I? He asked, pointing at my pencil. Of course. He picked up the pencil, the first time he'd voluntarily touched something I was holding, and drew 4 precise horseshoe shapes inside the bell of my jellyfish. His lines were clean and confident. There! Now it's accurate. Thank you, Mikail. He set down the pencil exactly where he'd found it and returned to his specimens. But something had shifted. A door, invisible to anyone watching, had opened a crack. From the hallway, I heard the sound of a phone vibrating in a pocket. Alexander was standing outside Mikail's room. He often stood there during our sessions, close enough to hear, far enough to not intrude, and I could see his shadow on the floor through the gap beneath the door. The shadow's hands were shaking. I saw the ship up close for the first time during our 4th week. Mikail had gone to brush his teeth, a process that took exactly 4 minutes and involved a specific sequence that could not be altered. And I was alone in his room. The ship sat on his desk in a pool of lamplight, and I walked over to look at it properly. Up close, it was worse than I'd thought. The hull was genuinely beautiful. Someone with steady hands and real skill had shaped and sanded it, fitting the planks with a precision that spoke of patience and care. The keel was straight. The waterline was marked with a thin pencil line, ready for paint that had never come. But above the hull, the ship was a graveyard of attempts. I counted the glue marks, small dots where mast pieces had been positioned, held, and released when the hands holding them couldn't stay still. Some of the thinner dowels, the ones meant to become yards and booms, were snapped clean, broken by fingers that gripped too hard because they were trying to compensate for their own trembling. 47 attempts. I could see every one of them. He works on it at night. I turned. Alexander stood in the doorway, Mikail's doorway, painted the blue of the jellyfish gallery. His jacket was off, shirt sleeves rolled, hands visible for the first time since I'd met him. They shook, constantly. A fine, persistent vibration that turned his fingers into instruments of imprecision. Not violent, not dramatic. Just enough. Just enough to make holding a thin dowel impossible. Just enough to make gluing a 1mm piece an exercise in failure. Mikail is asleep by 9, he continued, his voice low. I go to his room. I take the ship to my study. I try. He paused. I put it back before he wakes. Every night? Most nights. For how long? 1,427 days. But Mikail would tell you the current number. He counts. Something in his voice fractured on the last word. He always counts. I looked at the ship, at the beautiful hull and the broken masts and the dried glue and the pencil line that waited for paint. What happened? I asked. I wasn't asking about the ship. Alexander stepped into the room. He stood on the opposite side of Mikail's desk, the model between us like a monument. Natasha was killed 4 years ago, in this house. Mikail was 2. His accent thickened, consonants hardening like they did when emotion threatened his control. I was holding her hand when it happened, a business dispute that became personal. She was collateral. He said the word like it was a piece of broken glass he was pulling from his own throat. My hands began shaking that night. They have not stopped. I watched his fingers tremble against the desk's edge. Involuntary. relentless. The physical manifestation of a grief that his body refused to release even when his mind had learned to function around it. 7 specialists, he said. 3 countries. The neurologist in Zurich called it psychogenic tremor. The body remembering what the mind has processed. There is no cure that does not involve forgetting. And he stopped. I will not forget her. So the ship stays unfinished. The ship stays unfinished. We stood on opposite sides of his dead wife's son's desk, separated by a broken model and 4 years of trembling hands. And I understood something that no job description, no paycheck, no rational analysis of risk could have prepared me for. I was not here to fix this man. I was not here to heal his hands or replace his wife or solve his grief. I was here because a boy had carried a ship across Chicago to a laundromat and said, she sat down. And sitting down, as it turned out, was enough. The weeks settled into rhythm. Rhythm mattered in the Volkov household. Mikail's world operated on sequence and predictability, and I learned to move within it the way water moves through a channel, following the shape that already existed rather than trying to carve a new one. Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. 4 to 8. Sophie and Lily arrive. Shoes removed at the door. Mikail's rule, non-negotiable. Lily's purple backpack hung on the 3rd hook. Always the 3rd hook. Snack at 4:15. Apple slices, no skin. Arranged in a fan pattern on a white plate. Activities until 6. Dinner at 6:15. Within this structure, something extraordinary was happening. Mikail was talking. Not the careful transactional speech he used with his therapists, the recitation of facts, the answering of direct questions, the performance of social scripts he'd been taught. This was different. This was the unprompted, unstructured, sometimes bewildering flow of a mind that had been waiting for permission to share itself. Sophie, did you know that the blue whale's heart is the size of a small car? A Volkswagen Beetle, specifically. Not a Golf. The dimensions are different. Sophie, Lily's purple is wrong. She calls everything purple, but her sneakers are actually Byzantine violet. I looked up the hex code. Sophie, I counted the stairs today. There are 43 from my room to the kitchen. Yesterday there were 43 also. I don't know why I keep counting. I just do. Lily, for her part, had appointed herself Mikail's unofficial ambassador to the world of 4-year-olds. She showed him how to make a crown out of paper towels. She insisted he try purple grapes, the most purple food, and was genuinely offended when he preferred green ones. She fell asleep during one of his lectures on cephalopod intelligence, and he covered her with his blue blanket without being asked. She's inefficient, he told me once, watching Lily sleep. But warm. Alexander observed all of this from the periphery. Always present, never intrusive. He had a way of materializing in doorways, the study, the garden room, the hallway outside Mikail's bedroom, that suggested he'd been there all along, watching, counting his own private calculations about what was changing in his house. The ship remained on Mikail's desk. Neither of us mentioned it. But I noticed that the number of glue marks hadn't increased. Alexander had stopped trying. The school meeting happened on a Thursday in November. I wasn't supposed to be there. Alexander had mentioned it in passing, Mikail's quarterly evaluation at the private school he attended 3 mornings a week, a progressive institution that marketed itself as inclusive and charged tuition that could feed a family for a year. But Alexander's schedule shifted, a business matter, which in his world could mean anything from a contract negotiation to something I deliberately didn't think about, and he'd asked if I could attend in his place. As Mikail's companion, I was listed as an authorized contact, so I sat in a small conference room with dove-gray walls and Montessori posters, across from Mikail's teacher, the school psychologist, and the head of student services. They had folders, multiple folders, color-coded. Mikail is making some progress in structured activities, the teacher began, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who has rehearsed bad news. But his social integration remains a significant concern. They walked me through charts, graphs, incident reports. Mikail had reorganized the classroom library by Dewey Decimal during free play. He'd corrected the science teacher's explanation of photosynthesis, accurately, they admitted, but disruptively. He'd refused to participate in group circle time for the 4th consecutive week. Then the psychologist opened the final folder. "We'd like to recommend a transition plan," she said. "There are several excellent residential programs that specialize in PNCO." No. The word came out of me before I'd made a conscious decision to speak. 3 sets of professional eyebrows rose. "I'm sorry," the psychologist said. "Residential program." I repeated the phrase like I was identifying a species of invasive weed. "You want to send him away. We want to provide the most supportive environment for his..." "He reorganized your library by Dewey Decimal at age 6. And you're treating that as a problem?" "Miss Williams, we understand your attachment to Mikail, but..." My attachment. I set my hands flat on the table. They were trembling, not with the involuntary persistence of Alexander's tremor, but with the focused, temporary fury of a woman who has heard this particular music before. Different school, different child, same melody. The melody of convenience disguised as compassion. His teacher told him his science correction was disruptive. She didn't say it was wrong, because it wasn't wrong. He is more accurate than your science curriculum, and your solution is to put him in a facility because he makes adults uncomfortable. Silence. He sat on the floor of an aquarium and counted jellyfish pulses to the 300th iteration. I continued, my voice dropping but not softening. He can identify 17 individual specimens by their contraction patterns. He taught my 4-year-old daughter the difference between lilac and lavender using wavelength analysis. And you think the problem is that he doesn't sit in a circle. The head of student services cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should table this discussion until Mr. Volkov. Mr. Volkov will hear about this conversation. Every word of it." I stood. "Mikail stays." I walked out of the conference room with my heart slamming against my ribs and my hands clenched so tightly my nails left crescents in my palms. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall and breathed. Then I called Alexander. He answered on the first ring. He always answered on the first ring when I called. "They want to send him away," I said. No preamble. No softening. A silence so dense it had weight. "They will not," he said. And in those 3 words lived everything I had chosen not to think about regarding Alexander Volkov. The violence. The power. The absolute willingness to dismantle anything that threatened his son. "Thank you, Sophie." For what? For saying no before I had to. What he meant, though neither of us said it, for saying no in a way that didn't require anyone to disappear. The shutdown happened 4 days later. A boy named Tristan, 8 years old, the son of a commodities trader, the kind of child who learns cruelty the way other children learn arithmetic, found Mikail's plant classification project in the science room and tore it apart. Not accidentally, methodically, leaf by leaf, label by label, while 3 other children watched. The teacher's response, "It's just a poster, Mikail. We can make another one." Mikail didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't hit. He stopped speaking, stopped counting, stopped arranging. He sat down in the reading corner and faced the wall, and when the teacher touched his shoulder, he flinched so hard he knocked over a shelf of picture books. Anton brought him home at 11:15 in the morning. Mikail walked directly to his room, closed the door, and did not come out. When I arrived at 4 o'clock, my usual time, Alexander was standing in the hallway outside Mikail's blue door. His tie was loosened, his sleeves were rolled, his hands hung at his sides, shaking visibly, no longer hidden in pockets. "How long?" I asked. 6 hours. His voice was stripped of everything, accent, authority, pretense. What remained was a father standing outside his child's door, unable to go in. He won't respond. Not to me. Not to Anton. Not to Dr. Rowads. Has he eaten? No. Is he making any sound? He's talking to the ship. I can hear him through the door, but I can't make out the words. I looked at the door. Blue. The blue of the jellyfish gallery. The blue of the place where Mikail first let a stranger sit beside him. I need your permission to try something, I said. Anything. I sat down on the hallway floor, my back against the wall beside Mikail's door. I pulled my sketchbook from my bag and opened it to a blank page. Then I drew a jellyfish. A wrong one. 6 gonads instead of 4. Tentacles too long. Bell too narrow. Anatomically incorrect in exactly the ways Mikail had been correcting for weeks. I tore out the page and slid it under the door. Nothing happened. I drew a second jellyfish. Wrong in a different way this time. The bell was too flat. More like a pancake than a dome. I slid it under the door. Nothing. Third jellyfish. I made the tentacles spiral, which was biologically absurd. Under the door. A sound from inside the room. A page being picked up. Fourth jellyfish. I added spots, like a ladybug. Under the door. Fifth. Sixth. Each one wrong. Each one wrong in a specific, correctable way. I was on the 7th jellyfish. This one had what appeared to be a hat, which was a creative choice even by my standards, when a piece of paper slid back under the door from the other side. My heart stopped. On the paper, in Mikail's precise pencil lines, was a correction of my 3rd jellyfish. He'd redrawn the tentacles straight, added the correct number of gonads, and written in small letters at the bottom, "Tentacles do not spiral. You know this. Why do you keep drawing them wrong?" Not a question. A statement. An accusation. A lifeline. I drew an 8th jellyfish. This one was wearing sunglasses. The paper came back faster this time. Mikail had crossed out the sunglasses and written, "Cnidarians do not have eyes in the conventional sense. They have light-sensing organs called rhopalia. Sunglasses would be non-functional." I was smiling so hard my face ached. 9th jellyfish. I drew it upside down. Mikail's response, "This is a correct orientation for a jellyfish during a stall phase. Acceptable." 10th jellyfish. I drew 2, a large one and a small one, side by side. No correction came back. Instead, after a long pause, a different piece of paper slid under the door. On it, Mikail had drawn 3 jellyfish. A large one, a medium one, a small one. Swimming in the same direction. He'd labeled them A, B, C. Underneath, in his careful handwriting, A is Dad, B is Sophie, C is Lily. I pressed my hand against the door and closed my eyes. "You forgot one," I whispered. "Where's Mikail?" Silence. Then the scratch of pencil on paper, the page slid back. A 4th jellyfish had been added, the smallest, tucked between A and B, labeled D is me. D should be between A and C, I said through the door. Between Dad and Lily. No, his voice muffled by the wood, but clear. D is between A and B. That's the correct position. Between Dad and Sophie. That's where I fit. I heard Alexander make a sound behind me. I turned. He was still standing in the hallway, but he'd slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, mirroring my position. His legs stretched across the corridor. His hands trembled in his lap. His eyes were red. "Mikail," I said, turning back to the door. "Can you open the door?" The handle turned. The door opened. Mikail stood in the doorway, holding the model ship against his chest with both arms. His face was blotchy. His hair was disordered, the most physically disorganized I had ever seen him. Behind him, my 10 jellyfish drawings were arranged in a line on his bedroom floor, each one paired with his correction, like a conversation laid out in paper. He didn't look at me. He looked past me, down the hallway, to where his father sat on the floor with his hands shaking and his eyes wet. "Dad!" "Yes, Mikail. Sophie draws wrong jellyfish, but she keeps trying." A pause. Something being assembled behind his eyes. Not words, but something bigger. A conclusion drawn from data that only he could see. "Maybe you can finish wrong ships, but keep trying too. I did something that no specialist, no therapist, no expert had done. I didn't tell Alexander to relax. I didn't tell him to breathe. I didn't tell him to focus or concentrate or try harder or let go. I didn't suggest medication or meditation or acceptance. I handed him a paintbrush, not the precision modeling brush he'd been using, The kind with a tip fine enough to paint a single hair. The kind that punished every tremor with a visible flaw. I handed him Lily's brush, a wide-tipped watercolor brush with soft bristles and a thick wooden handle. The kind designed for a 4-year-old's imprecise, joyful strokes. We were in his study. The model ship sat on his desk under a lamp. Mikail sat on the opposite side, watching. Lily was asleep on the leather sofa behind us, curled around her purple hippo, her breathing slow and even. Alexander held the brush. It shook in his fingers. "Your hands are shaking," I said. "Don't stop." He looked at me. "What?" "Don't fight it. Don't try to steady them. Just paint." "I can't control." "I know. That's the point." I turned the ship so its hull faced him, the unpainted section below the waterline where I'd drawn a pencil guide. "Paint the water." He stared at me, then at the ship, then at the pencil line marking where the hull met the sea. "Water isn't still," I said. "It doesn't need a steady hand. It needs movement. It needs irregularity. It needs—" "Waves," Mikail said from across the desk. His voice was quiet but certain. Ocean surface waves are caused by wind friction. They're inherently irregular. The mathematical model uses stochastic differential equations. Randomness is the defining characteristic. I looked at Alexander. "Your son just told you that shaking is scientifically accurate for painting water." Alexander dipped the brush in blue paint. His hand trembled. The bristles touched the hull. The first stroke was uneven. The paint pooled where his hand paused and thinned where it jerked. It looked wrong. He started to pull the brush away. "Keep going," I said. Second stroke. Overlapping the first, but at a slightly different angle, because his hand had shifted involuntarily. The two strokes together created a texture, a ripple, a suggestion of movement. Third stroke. This one caught the edge of the first two and dragged the paint into a small curl at its terminus. A wave crest. Accidental. Perfect. Alexander stopped painting. He looked at what his hands had done. "Dad!" Mikail's voice from across the desk. He had leaned forward, his face closer to the ship than it had been in 4 years of watching his father try and fail. "Yes?" "Your hands make the waves look real." Alexander set down the brush. Not because he was done, because he needed his hands free. He needed them free to press against his eyes, which had closed, and to hold there, shaking, while his breath came in a pattern I recognized from Mikail. Counting. Alexander was counting. Not jellyfish, not pulses, something else, something private. When he lowered his hands, Mikail was standing beside him. Not across the desk. Beside him. Closer than I had ever seen the boy voluntarily position himself to another human being. "The waves need to go all the way around," Mikail said. He reached out and touched his father's hand, the trembling right hand that rested on the desk beside the brush. "Can you do the other side too?" Alexander's hand shook under his son's fingers. Mikail didn't pull away. "It feels like waves," Mikail said. "You feel like the ocean, Dad." Alexander Volkov, who controlled 4 districts of Chicago, who had signed orders that ended lives, who had held his dying wife and hadn't slept a full night since, put his trembling hand on his son's shoulder. Mikail didn't flinch. The hand shook against the boy's small frame, gentle and persistent, like the pulse of a jellyfish, like the rhythm of waves against a hull, like the heartbeat of something that had been waiting 1,427 days to come back to life. I stood by the desk with Lily's paintbrush in my hand and tears on my face, watching a father touch his son for the first time in 4 years, because a janitor had taught him that broken things don't need to be fixed. They just need to be used differently. The ship took 3 more weeks to complete. Alexander painted the water. Every night, after Mikail fell asleep, he took the ship to his study and painted waves. His hands shook through every stroke, and every stroke looked like the ocean, restless, alive, imperfect in exactly the way the real thing is imperfect. Mikail handled the technical work, the rigging, the sails, the precise details that required steady fingers. He was meticulous. He was methodical. He was, as he reminded us frequently, more accurate than any adult in the house. Lily contributed exactly one element, a tiny purple flag at the top of the mainmast. Mikail protested that it was historically inaccurate. Lily said it was the most beautiful part. After 17 minutes of deliberation, Mikail allowed it on the condition that it be classified as decorative, non-canonical. I sanded. I held pieces in place. I handed tools. I drew wrong jellyfish on scrap paper while they worked, and Mikail corrected them without looking up, a background process running in his extraordinary mind. On the night the ship was finished, Alexander placed it on the shelf in Mikail's room. Not his study. Not behind glass. On the shelf next to Volume M of the encyclopedia, and a photograph I hadn't seen before. A woman with dark hair and Mikail's precise bone structure laughing at something outside the frame. "Natasha," Alexander said when he saw me looking. Just the name. Nothing more needed. Mikail examined the completed ship from multiple angles, tilting his head the way he did when processing new data. "The waves are the best part," he declared. "They look real because they're imperfect, like actual ocean data." "Thank you, Mikail," Alexander said. "You're welcome. Can we start a submarine next? Sophie can help. She draws wrong jellyfish, but her sanding technique is adequate." Alexander looked at me across his son's room, over the head of the boy standing between us, and the expression on his face was one I had never seen on him before and would never forget. It was the face of a man who has just realized that the thing he thought he lost, not his wife, not his steadiness, but the ability to build something with his own flawed hands, has been returned to him by the most unlikely coalition in Chicago, a 6-year-old marine biologist, a 4-year-old purple enthusiast, and a janitor who counts wrong. "Wednesday," I said. "I'll bring sandpaper." The waves on the model ship caught the lamplight and shimmered. Imperfect. Trembling. Alive. Like everything worth building. Like us. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt broken in a way that can't be fixed, only reimagined, subscribe for new stories every week. We publish every Sunday. And tell me in the comments. Have you ever been told something about yourself was a flaw, only to discover it was a gift?